Welcome to Baby Snugs and Coffee Mugs. I'm Krista.
And I'm Kelsey. We're both labor and delivery nurses from Minnesota. In this podcast, we'll be covering all things pregnancy, delivering in a hospital, and caring for yourself and baby postpartum.
This podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only, so please seek medical advice from your healthcare provider. We are so excited for you to join us, so grab your coffee, snuggle up, and keep on listening.
Cheers!
Cheers! Welcome back, everyone, to episode 8 of Snugs and Mugs.
Welcome, everybody. This week, we are going to dive into you're in labor, and we're going to get specific with this episode kind of being geared to you having an epidural in place, too.
So we have noticed, guys, like going through all these things that we want to talk with you about. There's just so much information, and we don't want to overwhelm anyone in an episode. No one wants to listen to us talk for 2 hours straight.
Nobody, I guarantee it.
No, definitely not. So we are trying to break these down into small enough episodes so you're not overwhelmed. You have time to listen to it, and just kind of focusing on each different aspect of kind of your experience.
Yeah, exactly. So right off the bat here, we did have an entire separate episode of you being triaged. So we're going to kind of jump into this episode being you came in thinking you're in labor, and guess what? You are. We are now going to admit you. So what does that mean, you being admitted?
So at our hospital, you get triaged in a separate room, and I assume other hospitals are probably similar in that aspect. So if you are being admitted, that means you're going to a labor room. So this is where you are going to spend your whole time in your labor and your delivery. And in our hospital, you actually recover and stay in that room. At other hospitals, after your recovery, you may go to a postpartum room. But for this episode, we're just going to talk about you being in the labor room now. So you are now in the labor room. Hopefully we have all your admission questions done if they're not done already. And first thing we're always going to do is get an IV in place. Whether or not you are intending to have any kind of medication throughout your labor, we always place an IV for safety reasons. If there's an emergent situation, if we need to help out from our end, we want that IV in place. We want access so we can instantly do something if we need to.
Yep.
So with that being said, with your IV being placed, if you do have that group B strep come back positive in your pregnancy, I believe talked about that in our 3rd episode. So the 3rd trimester episode, you get swabbed for group beta strep. If that's positive, you will get antibiotics in labor. So we want to start those as soon as possible because we want those antibiotics in your body for 4 hours before baby is here. So IV is in, antibiotics are started if you guys need them, and then typically labs are going to get drawn. So we always have lab come and get a hemogram done, so we're going to look at your hemoglobin. We want a starting point, guys, so that if you are having bleeding, that's too much, or even if it's not, we want to have a starting point of this is where you are before any of this happens, so if we do draw it later if needed, we can see how you kind of trend. So those are kind of the initial things that we want to get done.
Yeah. So, you're starting to get a little bit more painful. But say you're just like not quite ready for an epidural yet. You still have the opportunity to bounce on the birthing ball. You can go sit in the tub or take a shower. The options are there. Just ask if there's anything, and we'll always offer to.
Right. So for this episode's purpose, you are done with those things. You are like, no, screw this, guys. This is terrible. I hate this, and I want to be comfortable, right? So you are asking for an epidural now. So what does that look like, Kels? What does it look like when you want your epidural? What are we going to do?
So you're looking at me. You're like, I need my epidural now. Okay. That tells me a couple things. First of all, I'm going to start some fluids on you. I'm also going to place baby on the monitor if baby's not already on there. And we're going to watch your contractions. We just want to make sure baby's tolerating everything good so far. Then I'm going to collect the supplies for the anesthesiologist. There's a handful of things that we need. We'll bring them back to your room, and then I'll typically be able to page anesthesia during that time. What we want you guys to keep in mind, at our hospital, we have an anesthesiologist always in-house. Mm-hmm. Not all hospitals do. And then also, we only have one anesthesiologist on during the nighttime and on the weekends. Yes. So keep in mind when you're starting to ask for that epidural, there is a chance that you have to wait for one. Hopefully it's not too long, but it can be sometimes.
So emergency situations elsewhere in the hospital, so emergency room, the OR, are going to trump the epidural placement. So if there is an emergency happening, it's the middle of the night, unfortunately, you do have to wait until basically it's your turn, guys, for the anesthesiologist. And at other places, if they're not in-house, sometimes you're waiting a half hour for them to drive in. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out at what point you want to get it. Kind of think about, okay, there is a chance I might have to wait a little bit. So that might come into play when you're deciding your timing wise of that epidural.
Yep. And then our pain management episode goes through our epidural placement entirely. So please go listen to that if you want to know like all the details of what you're about to expect. For this episode, we're just going to jump ahead and your epidural is in and it is working so well.
You're so comfortable.
So what next? You have your epidural. What does that mean for the rest of your labor?
So what we have to do, once you're nice and numb, we are going to place a Foley in, guys. Okay. So you cannot get up. You can't walk around. So how are you going to go to the bathroom? We have to put a Foley catheter in place.
Please don't get up and walk.
Do not get up. Do not do that, guys. So I, as the nurse, typically like my patients to be nice and comfy, have that epidural kick in. Right after the epidural placement, there's a lot of vital signs you have to do anyway. So I typically stay in the room. I wait till all those blood pressure checks are done, till you're nice and numb, and then I'll put your Foley catheter in.
Same. You look at my face for like a good half hour. Yeah. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's a pretty face to look at.
Thanks.
And then after I put the Foley in, typically if it's an appropriate time to check my patient's cervix, I like to do it right then because then hopefully after we reposition you, get you comfy, you can rest for a while. So we'll get a cervical check if that is a good time to do it. And then I'm going to reposition you, get you hopefully really comfy and get you ready for, I think, the best nap that you are going to take in probably the last 9 months.
Fair.
With that being said, it's not going to be a long nap, but I have had patients that say that that is for sure the hardest that they have slept. They don't have to wake up to pee. They don't feel cramping and kicking and like you can feel some things, but like the way it's so much less and you're so tired from being in labor and so tired from the contractions and the pain and not sleeping that people just get knocked out. They get that epidural and they're like, I need a nap.
You are exhausted. And even though you're not feeling pain anymore, like your body's still working so hard.
Yeah.
So like you need that nap.
Which I think tricks people because sometimes they're like, well, I can't feel anything. Like, I don't know. Why am I so tired? It's like, no, your body's still doing it. Your muscles are doing all of those things. You just get the bonus of not feeling all of that happening.
Again, epidurals are great things, guys.
Yeah. As we said, I've had 3. So I am slightly biased, but I very much enjoyed the ones I've had. So what happens after hopefully that first good nap? What we are going to do is we are going to be frequently repositioning you guys. So the epidural works by gravity. So once that epidural is placed and you're laying on, let's say it's your left side, if you're there for an extended period of time, that medication is going to slowly start to gravitate lower towards that side that's by the bed, so your left side, which in turn can mean your right side can start to feel more. So typically we like to move you guys before that stuff can occur. So we might go left side to right side. We might sit you up high. We use lovely things called peanut balls. I know we all love the peanut ball. You can put that between your knees, between your feet. There's just a bunch of different ways that we can use the peanut ball. And we really are trying not only to help your epidural work, but we also are trying to put different pressure on different areas of your cervix to help it dilate. So if you guys think about it, if you're sitting in that same spot the whole entire time, even if you are comfortable, you're having the most amount of pressure on one area of the cervix that whole time. Where if you're switching positions, the pressure is going to gravitate to other different areas and hopefully dilate you quicker and make things go a little faster for you guys.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of people do actually get really concerned with that. Like if I get an epidural, like I'm just going to be sitting in bed. And fun fact, we have all kinds of fancy positions that we can put you in. And that is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to get that cervix to keep dilating. And hopefully in the future, we will get those positions out to you guys. If you guys want to hear about them or know about them, we are happy to talk on those.
Yeah, we will take pictures. We'll do whatever you guys want. We will give you a handout because there are so many different labor positions for like different stages of labor. for when your baby's in different positions inside of you.
Yeah.
So there's a whole
so
list.
many I would have to like. I have to look them up. Like I definitely have like my favorite like handful of them.
Yeah.
But like
The go-tos, yeah. And then the other reason why we're probably going to be repositioning you is the baby's heart tones. So you might notice while you're in labor, there are going to be times that, or there can be times that the baby's heart rate dips a little bit. Sometimes this is the baby's really engaged in your pelvis and the head's starting to get compressed. Sometimes it just is the baby has its arm on the cord and it's causing compression. So anytime we're seeing a dip in that heart rate, typically the first thing we do is we come in, reposition you, try to get that baby moved, try to free up that umbilical cord if that is what's causing the heart tones to dip. And majority of the time, it will resolve things. So don't expect your glorious nap to last all that long, guys, because here we will. I think I've used this in another episode. We will be crappy flopping you guys in the bed. You don't get to stay in one position for too long.
No, definitely not. And that's bringing us to one of our like next questions that we get asked, I think, pretty frequently is, when do you know it's time then?
Yeah. Like how do you guys know that I'm progressing? How do you know when it's time to push? Everybody asks me that.
Everybody.
So that brings us to cervical checks. So typically we are rechecking your cervix about every 2 to 3 hours and as needed. As with everything else we talk about, this is a world of gray, guys. So everything's very situational. There are times where you don't need to be checked that often. There are times we don't want to check you that often. Say your water has been broke for a day and a half or something like that, guys. But baseline, let's just go off. We're going to check you every 2 to 3 hours, making sure that you're progressing, making sure that your cervix is still dilating. And then if we need to, so say if you all of a sudden feel something different, you're in a lot of pain, you feel a lot of pressure, something changes on your end, or if the baby's looking differently, that might be a reason why we might check sooner as well. Which brings us to, what if my cervix isn't changing? What do we do then, Kels?
Yeah, there is, so again, we are wanting to do those different repositions. However, we talked about this in our last episode. We can start talking about breaking your water at this point too, if it hasn't already broken itself or if we haven't already done it for you. So cervix is just kind of hanging out now. We want you to keep progressing, obviously. We don't want you to sit in labor for the next 5 days. Again, we'll offer to break that water. If it's already broken, if it's not an option, we can start talking about augmenting with Pitocin. And I feel like you explained this super well. So
yeah, so what augmentation means, so for a lot of people when they hear Pitocin, they think of being induced, which is a medication that we do use for inductions. But what an augmentation of labor would mean, so your body is already in labor and for some reason it's either stalling out or it's slowing down. So what we can do is we can give you a medication called Pitocin, which women have oxytocin naturally in their body. So Pitocin is basically synthetic oxytocin. So we give that to you to remind your body and to encourage your body to do what it was already doing and just to do it a little bit more often. So you're already contracting, you're already in labor, but we are just encouraging your body to contract closer together, maybe a little stronger, and a little bit more in a better pattern in hopes that your labor will just go a little bit smoother.
yeah, I love the word encourage. That's just like the perfect way to put it.
Yeah, so it's really just like a boost in the right direction, I would say.
Yep, just a little reminder for that body.
So we can break your water, we can do some Pitocin, we will always be doing repositioning, and majority of the time, these are the things that you will need to just kind of get you through the end. Again, I think in this last episode, we had talked about internal monitors. So if your cervix is not changing, guys, there is a chance that they might put that intrauterine pressure catheter in to see the strength of your contractions, see maybe if they're just not strong enough and that's not why it's not changing. Maybe we aren't monitoring them absolutely correctly. Maybe externally we're not seeing all of the contractions, or maybe we're seeing things that we think are contractions and really aren't. And so that can just help us gauge whether or not we should start Pitocin or we should give you Pitocin, or if we can just keep doing what we're doing and let your body just kind of take over. And actually, I have seen sometimes too where people will get a little bit of Pitocin and then we actually shut it off because like your body again, just needed that little bit of encouragement. And it was like, oh yeah, this is what we're doing.
Yep.
And then you just shut it off and they just keep going and
Yeah, I
finish
completely agree.
So yeah, so say we solved that issue, right? So now your cervix is changing. Really for the rest of your labor, guys, we are just going to do those repositions, try to get you comfy, try to get you moved a lot, and the checks will happen every 2 to 3 hours until all of a sudden you are fully dilated. Fully dilated means 10 centimeters, okay? So you are 10 centimeters dilated. There is no longer cervix left. Usually around this time, most women will start to say that they feel rectal pressure. Sometimes it's a little bit before your 10 centimeters, and sometimes they don't feel it at all. But most women at this point will start to feel rectal pressure, or I feel like everyone's like, I feels like I have to poop.
Yeah, I agree. And I always actually tell people when they get an epidural too, if they feel anything different, like I want to know right away. And especially if they start to feel that pressure, they can feel pressure coming and going with contractions. It can be more of a constant feeling. I guess you've had epidurals, so what was it that you felt when it was 10
honestly,
or did you not feel anything?
With all of them, I felt pressure. So with my first, I actually started feeling pressure. I was a lip. So I had a little bit of cervix left just on one side. So I actually couldn't start pushing right away.
So this is actually a great point to throw in. What does lip rim mean?
Okay. So lip rim means that you have cervix that's all the way gone on most of the cervix, or most of the vaginal wall, I guess you would say. And then there's just one area where there is a little bit of cervix left. So most times we do want to wait for all of that to be gone, especially if it's your first baby. It needs to be all the way gone before you start pushing. So with my first, I had that little lip left, and even though I felt come and go pressure, it wasn't time to push yet because I had a little bit of cervix left. We repositioned me, and in like 15 minutes, I think it went away. So then from then on, and then with my other labors as well, I always felt like that come and go pressure with each contraction, and then it was a constant pressure all the time. It felt like basically like I had to poop, and then it would just increase when the contraction would come, and then it would decrease when it would go away, but it never went away.
Okay.
So that's usually when you know, like, okay, it is time. Like, it's time to push. And then even though I had an epidural with, I'm trying to think, not my second. With my second, I didn't feel like when I was pushing, but with my first and third, like I almost felt like I had to push. Like it just was
I've heard that.
So even with an epidural, like it was so like overwhelming once it got so constant, like I just like had to do it. Like my body wanted to do it. With my second, I was a little bit more numb, and she was so little that I think that made a difference. She was my smallest baby.
Sure, that would make sense.
So I did not get that. Like, I felt the come and go, but it didn't feel like it, like, took over me, where it did with the other two.
And then going to the opposite of this, I have 100% had patients that don't feel anything the entire time.
Me too.
And that is okay, too.
Yep. That is another good point you make, because the pressure catheter can help with that, too. And then we can just tell you guys when to push. So as Kelsey kind of talked about in the beginning of this episode, we wanted to break everything down. So we are not going to talk about pushing in this episode, so we're pretty much really at the end here. So we are completely dilated and we are ready to push, and we are going to talk about that in our next episode. And hopefully at this point in your labor, if you haven't talked about pushing already, your nurse is talking to you about what pushing looks like. I think it's different than what most people think it's going to be, because movies make people think that babies just fly out.
No, they don't. You guys have some work to do. And I am always one to talk. I want to talk about pushing before you're 10 centimeters.
Yeah, me too.
If you're like 8 or 9 centimeters, I'm going to be like, hey, I want to talk about this now. We're going to review it when it's time, but just so you kind of have all the steps in your mind.
Right. So at this point, guys, we're complete. We're either talking about pushing or we're ready to push, which is where we will pick up next week. So hopefully you guys come back and listen to the pushing and delivering aspect of that coming soon. But yeah, thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Chatting next week. Bye.